Hi, I'm so glad that you are watching tonight, and I am excited for this lesson. It's one of my favorite lessons, and I just want to know, what is your Goliath? What is the thing that makes you fearful, or the person maybe you need to talk to that you haven't been able to do, or maybe just makes your heart beat, that uh, you feel like you should talk to a relative about Christ, or maybe it's a work thing that's totally overwhelming and you can't get past it. I've had that lately. And there's been some tears shed. And I know that it's really hard. Well, I thought that this lesson was really appropriate for how busy our lives are right now. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about David and Goliath. There's probably no other child Sunday school lesson that's more well known than David and Goliath. Well, you know, there might be a couple of others that are similar, but it's really close up there near the top. And I just feel like it's such an important message. And even though kids hear it when they're little, or maybe you've seen a picture of the young boy with the huge giant Philistine, uh, there's a lot more depth to it than that. And so I would like to there read a little bit of part of the book that's coming out that has a chapter on David. And then I'm actually also going to share a testimony from someone that's in the book that has had, several opportunities to fight her Goliath. And so right now I'm going to read to you an excerpt from a chapter in the book. And I wanted to tell you the story about the prophet Samuel, and he anointed Saul as king, but Saul didn't obey. And so God sent Samuel to talk to Saul and say, you have not obeyed. And this is taken from 1 Samuel 15:11. I regret that I have made Saul king, for he has turned back from following me and has not carried out my commands. And Samuel was distressed and cried out all night. Saul, he never really gave his whole heart to God. He never really did what he was supposed to do. He had bursts of times when he did what he was supposed to do, but just not solidly. And so the Lord tells Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul, since I rejected him from being king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have selected a king for myself among his sons. So Samuel goes to Bethlehem, and Jesse lines up all his sons. And each one comes before Samuel, and Samuel says, no, he's not the one. And no, he's not the one. Each one. And the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at their appearance or height of stature, because I rejected him. For God sees not as a man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. So Jesse sends all his guys, and then finally Samuel says, are these all your sons? And he says, no, I have one more, but he's just young and he's out tending the sheep. And he says, send him to me. I want to see him. And God had a plan, a big plan. And it would, this story went down as one of the biggest stories of all time. In verse 12 and 13 it reads, so he sent and brought him in. He was ready with beautiful eyes and a handsome appearance. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is he. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of the brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. And Samuel arose and went to Ramah. Now, this didn't really please Saul, but he asked for David to come to him and play his harp. David was a very skilled musician, and he knew that. And when whenever David played his harps, evil spirits left Saul. And so he continually had him play. The Philistine army that was nearby was giving them a lot of trouble. And they were continually against Israel. And in chapter 17, the Philistines gathered, and they were on one mountain, and Israel was on the other mountain. And they said, okay, we're going to send our champion Goliath, who, I don't know if we know exactly how tall, between 7 and 9 feet, I've heard, but I don't think, we really totally know, but he was a really big guy. And we'll send him over, and he had a bronze helmet on his head, and he had full armor that was bronze, and a javelin, and he told Israel, come and fight me. And he makes this deal. He says, okay, if Israelites win, then the Philistines will serve Israel. But if he loses, then Israel will serve the Philistines. So everybody was pretty upset about this. And for 40 days, Goliath made the same challenge. But none of the Israelites wanted to fight him because they figured they would just die. So David hears of this, and he had been out tending sheep, and he hears of this, and he left his sheep, gathers up his things, and he goes to tell Saul that he wants to fight the giant. Then David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant will go fight with the Philistine. Saul said to David, you are not able to go against the Philistine. You're but a youth, while he has been a warrior from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant was tending his father's sheep. When a lion or bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after him and attacked him and rescued from his mouth. And when he rose up against me, I seized him and struck him and killed him. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of the Philistines. David accepts the challenge. He doesn't even flinch about it. He just goes, and he speaks with confidence. He knows God is going to help him. He gathers 5 smooth stones, and he puts them in his pouch, and he gets his sling, and he approaches the Philistine. Then the Philistine says in verse 43, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? David responds in verses 45 to 49. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you, and I will give the dead bodies of the armies of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. Then it happened that the Philistine rose and came and drew to meet David, and David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand into his bag, took a stone, put it in his sling, slung it, and he hit the Philistine right here on the forehead, and he just fell over dead. No fear, no stopping to worry about it, just boldness to do what he knew he should do because he trusted God would just take care of things. I mean, this to me is just a way wonderful story to all of us, that whatever's going on in our life, whatever our Goliaths are, that we can overcome that. And if it's God's will for that to happen, but we have to take steps to make something happen. And something else that I wanted to read for you is a story by a person, a testimony of a woman in our church who doing this book, she was the second person that came to mind. Because I remember like 20 years ago, someone coming to our church who had gone to college with her and said that Rebecca was this girl who went into the projects in Chicago and her long hair down her back, and she walked in to talk to people and share with them about the Lord. And she had no fear. She walked into all these apartments and she just wasn't fearful. She just went and did what she was supposed to do. When I asked her to share her testimony for this book, because it was on boldness, she was the last person to turn it in, or the second to the last person to turn it in, because she didn't want to toot her own horn, and she didn't want to pat herself on the back for doing something. She's just a humble, sweet woman, and we've all learned greatly from her. And she's ministered to, I've seen her minister to hundreds of people through the years since that time, when I first met her like 20 years ago. And it's just pretty amazing. So her testimony, I appreciate, but I think there's way more to her than that she wrote about. But it gives you an example of someone that all of you could be like, because we're all just regular people, and we all have things in our lives that we need to face. And so she gives a few examples of some things in her life. So I'll read her testimony as she writes it for you. I love how God directs our steps and brings us into relationships where we can share his love. There have been many times in my life when I felt in over my head in a ministry setting. When I am in situations where I feel overwhelmed, I remember God has brought me to this place, and he is with me. 2 Corinthians 12, 9 through 10 says, But he said to me, My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me for the sake of Christ. And I am content with weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I'm weak, then I am strong. Many years ago, I was a college student. I lived in downtown Chicago. All students were given ministry to be involved. I was assigned to ministry in the nearby inner city projects. I met and loved working with the kids in that community and continued in it for all my 4 years at college. One special memory from time attending a retreat out of the city with some kids. A few of them had never been to the country. It was fun to experience God's creation with them. It was especially fun to hear their thoughts on how dark it was and how quiet out of the city. Who would have guessed that kids who faced gangs and regular violence would be so scared of the dark and the absence of car alarms? I grew up in the rural Midwest, yet there I was in the middle of a big city. God gave me a place to serve and share his love with children who were very different from me, yet the same as me in many ways. This was a time of growth, and I still enjoy contact with some of those kids. One memory was talking to a mom about the phrase Good Samaritan. She was not aware of the story from the Bible and didn't know the history behind this phrase. It was so fun to share how Jesus used this story to teach how to be a good neighbor by carrying all people who cross their path. How wonderful that it carries the same meaning today, even for those who don't read the Bible. This was the time when God was directing my steps into relationships where I could share his love. I frequently felt out of my comfort zone as I interacted with others whose lives were so different than mine, yet similar in so many ways. I think we all have people like that in our lives that we can share with and that we have shared with. I'd love to hear your stories. You've probably all shared with people. And so there's people we can share with. There's people that are against us, like David and Goliath, just impossible odds. There's situations at work that maybe you are not quite sure what to do about, or you don't know how to do. That's the way I've been the past month. Not how to, I'm not very techie. I have a hard time doing certain things. And when I'm overwhelmed, I don't know where to start. It's really hard for me. So there were some complications with getting the book to print, and I actually didn't know how to do them or what I should do about it. And I'm so thankful for team members who they are gifted in that way and they can help. And I have to admit to some tears being shed, but I really prayed about it and took a step and another step. And it's like, oh, maybe I can do this little part. And then I did another part, and then it wasn't so overwhelming. And so maybe it's not a slingshot, but it's methodology, maybe, and how we go about overcoming something. And so I don't have all the answers for the millions of scenarios out there, but I pray for all of you, and I hope that you can think of some things that you need to overcome in your life this week. And you can go to 1 Samuel 15 and you can start reading about David and more in his life. And some of my very most special passages that I go to, my very favorites, are in Psalms that David wrote. Because sometimes he's just so honest with God, and it just yells at him even, or cries out to him, or shares his frustration with something. But he works through it, and then at the end of the psalm, he's praising God for who he is. And I think sometimes we just need to be grateful for things and thankful, and that makes us get through things. And I remember my mama, she prayed about all sorts of things in her later years, like, looking for a parking spot. Oh, Lord, help me find a parking spot. And I thought it was just, as a teen, I would probably roll my eyes and think, oh my goodness. And now I do the exact same thing. I think sometimes just little things, sometimes we have a easier time telling God about big things in our life, and then there's all the little things that happen every day that frustrate us and get us irritated easily, and it just robs our joy. Those big things just steal our joy. And it's interesting how God, he wants us to be bold for him. He wants us to take purposeful steps. He wants us to go forth with intention. And he will help us. And he will provide for us. He'll provide a way. And we just need to bring those needs before him, and so that we can overcome that obstacle that we're thinking of. So I ask you again, what is your Goliath? What is something that this week you can work on? And dear friend, I just pray that you will just want to overcome it and not just wallow in it, but take steps to overcome it. And I'll pray for you this week. And you can share with me, and you can share on our group, and you can invite friends. I hope you invite friends to this. The more people, the better. We can share God's love with everybody, and it might help someone. So feel free to invite people, and they can tell their friends, and then we can all share together. And you can write something in our group, and you can ask questions, or you can private message me, and we can talk about it. And next week we'll have another lesson, and I have another testimony I want to share with you, and I am so thankful we have this opportunity, and so I'll see you next week.